You're listening to Dr. Emma and me on the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. And now, here are your hosts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Rebecca Larson. It's Dr. Emma and me, and I'm joined, of course, by my co-host, Dr. Emma. But we also have a wonderful guest today. First time on Dr. Emma and me, not the first time on Tudors Dynasty and Beyond. And welcome back, Dr. Ellie Woodacre. Welcome.
Hello, lovely to be back.
Oh, we are so excited to have you.
You tell? I'm like, yay!
You know, Emma,
super excited.
Emma mentioned wanting to have you on the show because we thought you would be perfect to pair up some queens because you do a lot of work in medieval history, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Medieval queenship is kind of my home ground. Even though I work these days in more places and periods, that's kind of my home grounding, definitely.
Yeah. And I think, Emma, for a change, maybe I'm going to let you take the lead on this.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. That's very kind of you. Well, I'm so excited that Ellie's here. I want to thank Ellie, first of all, for being a powerhouse in the queenship world and for doing so much. She's got the Royal Studies Network at the university. She works at the University of Winchester. She has many students. And I mean, I couldn't speak more highly of Ellie because she's amazing. She came to the opening of Faces for Eternity in that seems like a lifetime ago now, Ellie. The
Absolutely.
warmest day in London that anyone remembers. So we had a lot of fun. So thank you so much for coming and, for always being a champion of work. She's also participated in the Female Perspective at the Prado Museum with Noelia Garcia Perez, who sends you a big hug, Ellie, by the way. She told me this morning. So I'm so excited to have you here. To be honest.
Thank you. It's great to be back again. It's lovely to see you again. And I do remember that very hot day seeing Faces of Eternity.
Yeah, well, at least you remember seeing medals because my daughter's like, what do you mean we saw medals? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you still remember. But it was a very hot day, but it was so nice, so amazing. And we did a video, Rebecca. Remember, we did a video for it. Every time I see that video, it looks so cool. So thank you to Nigel too for helping us out. And now the exhibition is over, but we still have the catalog, right, Ellie?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for helping with all of that. But today is a different topic.
Yes. Yeah.
Today's Parallel Lives. And in 2022, Ellie published a book about Joan of Navarre. Joan of Navarre. And I love the subtitle of it. Maybe you could tell us more why you chose it, because there's different ideas there in the subtitle of that book. Can you tell us more about that? And then we can introduce the first person, Joan of Navarre, and then maybe you can tell us why and who you decided to pair her with, and tell us more about that.
Definitely, yeah. So the subtitle of the Joan of Navarre book is Infanta, Duchess, Queen, Witch with a question mark at the end. And it's very particular that there's a question mark there. So the reason why I chose that subtitle is the Infanta, Duchess, Queen is all the different stages of Joan's life. So she was an Infanta of Navarra, and then she was Duchess of Brittany. And then in her second marriage, she was Queen of England. So, it shows that kind of progression in her life. And certainly the chapters in the biographical section of the book are kind of grouped around those kind of key stages in her life. Now, the last bit, the witch with a question mark, is because before I wrote this book, a lot of people, Joan of Navarre, she is one of the more obscure queens of England. And if people know her at all, they know her because she's the one that was accused of witchcraft, or she was a witch or whatever. However, one of the big takeaways, I hope, from my book is she wasn't a witch and she wasn't even accused of witchcraft. That is kind of one of those rumors and fake news kind of things. She was actually accused of treason. And she was accused of, basically working for the king's death in the most horrible manner imaginable. And a couple of contemporary chronicles kind of translated that horrible manner into necromancy or witchcraft. And then that became the fake news that stuck, basically. So all these people are like, oh yeah, she was a witch, she was witchcraft. No. But it has to be. It had to be addressed, right? Because so many people have this idea about her. I just want to put it right into the title, even to be like, right, I'm going to deal with this head on. And, the witch question mark is in there.
I guess that's right, because, with these fake news things, well, in this case, you're saying it's fake news, but in other cases, there's some things you just have to address when you address certain people and historical figures, especially women. They just are so evil or so good that it's always like fishy. So thank you for doing that and for addressing those things. And maybe she was a witch. I'm not gonna. No, I'm only kidding. We are in Halloween week, so it's very pertinent too to
Appropriate.
talk about that. And to be honest, I believe you. She's quite an obscure figure because until your book, I didn't know much about her. And also, but she is fascinating. Why she fascinates me is she seems to be connected to this Navarre, Brittany, and England. It's all around the Atlantic Ocean. These alliances that are around the Atlantic, the kingdoms in the Atlantic Ocean. So it hits home. She's Queen of England, obviously, but Brittany is also a place that interests me a lot because it has a lot of cultural and artistic exchanges with England. Isn't that where Henry VII ends up, I think, in Brittany for
Yes,
some years?
exactly. Yeah. And he gets the support he needs there to kind of mount his invasion of England. So yeah, England and Brittany have a very intertwined history. Actually, ironically, so do Navarre and Brittany as well. And they had a lot of common interests, most particularly in terms of their relationship with the French crown and trying to kind of remain independent of it. So yeah, definitely. So there's, she's a really interesting person as this kind of pivot point and connection between all of them. And I'm really hoping that what this book has done is she's a classic example of all these amazing queens which we're not hearing enough about, which we're not doing enough work on. And as much as I love, kind of the most famous queens, your Cleopatras and Elizabeth I and all the rest of it, there is, for every really well-known one, like Eleanor of Aquitaine or whatever, there's 1,000 equally interesting but less well researched, queens. So really what I want to do with this book and really what the Lives of Royal Women series is really trying to do is champion and bring out the stories of these exciting and interesting royal women so that we can understand queenship better, but also understand these women's lives better.
Nice, amazing. No, and so who did you decide to parallel Joan of Navarre with, and why?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one, but I decided to pair her with someone who was actually a direct contemporary of Joan, who was alive at exactly the same time, and these women's lives were really intertwined. So I've decided to choose Isabeau of Bavaria, Queen of France. So, she, again, they were born and died within years of each other. For example, Isabeau dies in 1435, Joan dies in 1437. They're born almost exactly the same time as well. So they really are, very parallel in that sense. And they're also, again, they're queens at the same time. They're related by very closely by marriage, like more than one way. So Isabeau is not only married to Joan's cousin, the Valois king Charles VI, but actually Isabeau's daughters, one of her daughters, Jeanne, is actually married to Joan's son. And obviously another daughter, more well known to people in English history, Catherine de Valois, obviously marries Joan's stepson, Henry V. And actually, Catherine de Valois and Joan of Navarre have a long period in which they're both dowager queens at the same, English court of Henry VI. And they actually, Catherine de Valois and Joan die in the same year of 1437. So, Isabeau and Joan's lives are very much kind of enmeshed. But there's more things they have in common. And I think one of the things that's the most obvious is the Hundred Years' War. Both of their lives are completely enmeshed in the Hundred Years' War. And one of the things in particular is, Henry V's campaigns in France and the impact of that. But they're coming at it from really different perspectives. So obviously, we're very familiar with the impact on Isabeau. When Henry V invades and he's victorious at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, that has disastrous consequences for France, which ultimately leads to Isabeau having to kind of be involved in the drafting of the Treaty of Troyes, which not only marries her daughter Catherine to Henry, but basically signs away her son's birthright as the Dauphin, which is, a really kind of, contested history, which I'm sure we're going to get more into in just a bit. But for Joan, on the other side of the channel, Joan is in this horrible position with Agincourt because Henry V is her stepson, right? So, in a way, she's supporting him. In fact, she even has to lead the service of Thanksgiving when Henry's victories become known back in England. She actually leads the bishops, etc., in this very public service of Thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey. But at the same time, on the other side of the channel, the children that she had with the Duke of Brittany in her first marriage are enmeshed in that. In fact, her son, Arthur de Richemont, is taken captive at the Battle of Agincourt. Her son-in-law, Jean d'Alençon, is killed, which widows her daughter, Marie, which has huge impact on Marie's life as well, right? So, and her son, the Duke of Brittany, Jean V, was prevaricating and trying to kind of, hang out of the battle. And Joan had done so much work to try to improve relations between England and Brittany and to try to keep the peace, if you like, and try to keep Brittany and England allied, etc. But 1415 is a really kind of scary moment for her. So it's disaster for Isabeau, but it's also a really challenging moment for Joan when she's literally kind of pulled both ways. And I can only imagine kind of how it must have felt to be Joan. Was she torn up and worried for her children, or was she happy for Henry V, or both at the same time, or just or neither? I don't know. But it must have been incredibly hard.
Well, I just love the drama of the 15th century. I love it. The 15th century, we love the Tudors and we're obsessed with them, but the 15th century, my goodness, it has some intensity to it, doesn't it? There's so many wars. And around this time, I was thinking when you were talking, these are the kings that Henry V, Henry VI are the kings that appear in the first portraits that Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon have, and are painted in the reign of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and are still in the royal collection today. I'm thinking this is just very important to the Tudors later. So everything that happens in the 100-Year War, because of not just these people you're talking about, but also the Lancasters and all that, just shaped so much the 16th century. This is why I timidly sometimes go back to the 15th century, but it's complex. You were talking about this, it sounded like a soap opera, didn't it, Rebecca? Did you keep up with all of the names and all the family ties? You
trying.
thought the Habsburgs were doing things, and now you're like, what?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just here for the show today. I'm just sitting back and enjoying the history between you two.
It was very soap opera. It's like she has kids, but then she has to go somewhere else, and then she has other kids, and they're torn, these women. But what I was hearing all the time is women are in charge of peacemaking usually, right? And you worked a lot of that, and across cultures, not just in Western, like in the kingdoms we love to study about in Europe, but throughout cultures and throughout times, right? I think that's very interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a key part of queenship, right? Because there was this understanding that, the kind of the yin and the yang, like you need the male and female aspects of monarchy, but men are traditionally associated with, kind of war and hostility. And women are meant to be the opposite, right? They're meant to be kind of these peacemakers, right? They're meant to be mediators and intercessors and diplomats effectively, right? And their marriages are often products of that. I mean, again, look at Catherine de Valois' marriage, right? In the Treaty of Troyes, it's meant to be a diplomatic bond to kind of heal the breach and unite the two dynasties, etc. So yes, absolutely, this idea that men make war and women make peace is really kind of a key part of queenship. And certainly Joan, again, is using everything in her arsenal. She's involved in the drafting of treaties between England and Brittany. She's involved in gift-giving strategies and even using her network of informants and household members, etc., as kind of go-betweens between England and Brittany to try and keep peace between them. And obviously, I mean, her first marriage, again, was, sealing an alliance between Brittany and Navarre as well. So we can definitely see that kind of imperative for peacemaking, that kind of expectation that queens are peacemakers, certainly in Joan's life and Isabeau's as well, obviously being involved in that drafting of the Treaty of Troyes. Again, even if she sells her kind of son down the river in terms of, giving away his birthright as the Dauphin, again, she's trying to make peace. She's trying to, heal the realm when it's been through a period of intense, not only invasion, but also intense warfare from within between the House of Orleans and Burgundy. Again, it's being riven inside as well from like civil war.
Yeah. What kind of legitimacy does it have when a mother writes off her son's rights? So is that something acceptable? Can you take away someone's birthright?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I think is really interesting when we kind of bring these two women together and do this parallel lives, because Another thing that both Isabeau and Joan have in common is they're both very fertile. So they both, have a lot of children. Joan has 9, Isabeau has
Ooh.
12. So, that's a lot of children. But ironically, part of what's fed into both of their kind of negative reputation is that they're both seen as bad mothers. So in
Mm,
Isabeau's case, obviously a big part of that is, again, kind of effectively cutting her son out, the Dauphin, who becomes Charles the Seventh eventually. But he feels very aggrieved by the way in
right.
which the Treaty of Troyes kind of pans out, and really opens a rift between him and his mother. In Joan's case, Joan has all of her children in her first marriage to the Duke of Brittany, but she makes her own kind of secret negotiations for her second marriage with Henry IV. And when it comes known, she's basically having to kind of leave Brittany and all of her children, pretty much all of her children, behind. And of
Mm,
course, that's really been interpreted by a lot of people as Joan putting ambition above motherhood, that she
yes.
basically, she wanted that crown and she was,
Hmm.
happy to do whatever it took, to kind of make that happen. So certainly it's something that's really kind of, rebounded badly on both of them. Both of them is seen as basically putting politics and ambition ahead of the needs of their children. And it's certainly not done any of their reputations any favors.
Gosh,
I
sometimes as a
wish.
mother, you have to make tough decisions, right?
Yeah, I wish
Yeah.
things had changed and people didn't judge mothers for wanting to have ambition and a career. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, no, exactly. Something we can appreciate today, definitely. But it's also part of being a queen, right? I mean,
Hmm.
this is the difficulty, right? Sometimes what you have to do as a political leader, as a person of power, is not compatible with, the kind of the human needs that you have,
Right.
especially considering your kind of maternal role. And when you
Exactly.
have to make a choice between the right thing as a ruler and the right thing as a mother,
Hmm.
the ruler has to come first, and sometimes that does lead to, negative repercussions and the destruction of relationships between mothers and sons. And you can see that again and again throughout kind of queenship studies, right? I mean, think of Agrippina and Nero and, all the rest
Yes.
of it. There's, kind of conflicts between mothers and sons all the time. I think of, gosh, the other day, my queenship studies students and I were talking about the Empress Irene of Byzantium, who blinded her son, Constantine, when he was basically trying to oust her from co-ruling with him. So, there are queens that do ruthless things to their children in
Yes.
the name of political power. Yeah.
Well, yeah, in the podcast we've talked, I remember now the example of the tension between Isabel the First of Castile and Juana, really, and the tensions that
Mm.
arise between them because Isabel is a very authoritative mother, and not all of her children have the same character, even. It's not just the duty that you have to fulfill, these are people with personalities, right? And I was thinking when you were mentioning the pain of a mother, but the duty above all. One of the examples that Noelia always talks about, and she always says, I feel for this woman, is Charles V's sister, Juana of Austria, who has to leave her little baby son, Sebastian. And
Yeah.
then all she gets comfort with is all these pictures. And that's why we have so many portraits of Sebastian, is because she wants pictures all the time because she misses him. But she has to leave in and doesn't see him for many years when he's a little baby.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times you have to think that even when they were stick around, children sometimes could be raised somewhere else. Mothers and children didn't spend all the time together. It's unusual what we see with Isabel and her children. For Isabel of Castile, I'm speaking about now. So it's motherhood was very different back then. That's what I'm trying to say. Especially like you say when you were a queen, right? Um,
Absolutely. Queens are working mums, right? And
yeah,
again, they have to put the rule of the realm first. And you're right.
yeah,
They our kind of understanding of motherhood in a modern nuclear family kind of sense just does not work well when you're thinking about the demands of queenship and the role that queens play. They were expected to be good mothers, but their understanding
yes.
of what it means to be a good mother or our understanding of what it means to be a good mother aren't necessarily compatible.
Right, right, right. Being a mother is difficult in the 15th century, in the 21st
Amen.
century.
Amen.
Yes. Do you see great differences? Because we do parallelize, but we might like to talk about differences. That speak also about you saying these two women lived at the same time. do you see differences that show differences in their character? I'd love to know about people's personality.
Yeah. No, so there's a couple of differences that I can think about. I mean, one of the differences, and again going back to their reputation, is another thing that has kind of added to Isabeau's black legend is she's also accused of adultery, primarily with having an affair with her brother-in-law, the Duc d'Orléans, and of course that is something that
Oh,
really
with the
does kind of.
brother-in-law?
Oh
Wow,
yeah, oh yeah,
juicy.
yeah, very juicy, right?
Soap opera.
I love it.
But
Tell us more.
but but Joan's reputation isn't stained in that way. In fact, actually, Joan and Henry, for a royal couple, have a wonderfully harmonious relationship as far as we know. In fact, there's no evidence or rumors at all that either one of them had an affair. Henry is really kind of uxorious. Again, many kings have mistresses. In France, you have the maîtresse en titre. It's an official role even. There's no kind of, discussion of that in Henry IV's reign. So they have this really tight relationship. So of all the sins that's been laid at Joan's door, definitely adultery is not one of them, whereas that is one of the big things that, Isabeau of Bavaria is accused of. Now, Rachel Gibbons and Tracy Adams have done so much in recent years to kind of write about Isabeau of Bavaria and try to kind of clear her reputation or take another look at her and say, okay, all the rumors and the legends and the negative, kind of the black legend of Isabeau, let's unpick this a bit. So but that's something that's really stuck to her. Sexual slander often kind of sticks, if you like. I think another thing that's both a similarity and a difference, but it's really important to understanding these women and queenship is regency. So both of them have periods of being regents, but in very different circumstances. So in Isabeau's case, again, one of the things that's most famous about Isabeau is that her husband, Charles VI, has these bouts of madness starting in 1392 and happening periodically afterwards. And Isabeau is forced to step in. She's forced to be a regent, or Rachel Gibbons talks about maybe being a lieutenant general kind of thing. But, again, she's basically needing to step in and rule during these periods of madness, effectively. And so that is a very unusual kind of form of regency or lieutenancy that only a few other women kind of experience. And actually, I was thinking the other day is like, Wives of Mad Monarchs would make a great book. You could bring in Isabeau and Margaret of Anjou and Queen Charlotte and Elisabetta Farnese,
Catherine Barron.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But you know what I mean? So it's a really unusual situation. But Joan has a much more kind of typical regency. So when Joan's first husband dies in 1399, he was much older than Joan. Joan was his third wife. She becomes regent for their son, who becomes Duke John V, and she rules Brittany as regent from 1399 to 1402. And so that's a more typical kind of queenly regency, the kind of minority rule, queen stepping in to reign alongside their underage, child who's not old enough to rule on their own. So I think that's an interesting kind of both similarity that they're regents, but regents in very, very different contexts and very, very different circumstances.
I'm thinking that are they regents at the beginning of the 15th century?
Yeah, so Joan's regency is, like I said, 1399 to 1402, so right at the beginning of the 15th century. Yes. Isabeau's is more periodic. So, so the thing with Charles VI's bouts of madness is he would have periods of clarity and then bouts of madness again. So she has this kind of sporadic regency, kind of on and off.
So when the king is mad, they put him away, but then when he's okay, they bring him back. If you are a queen and you're you're going Tordesillas and you never come out.
Well, yes, poor Juana. Yeah, exactly.
Poor Juana, the first of Castile, was never left out, even though she probably had the same bouts of madness and bouts of clarity, and she clearly had it because in 1520, when they come and they're going to take away her son's crown, she's not that crazy because she's like, I'm not going to sign anything, guys. Sorry. So you have to understand these people and mental health too. It's a lot of pressure to be a queen or a king. Not just to be a queen.
Absolutely. And understanding the nature of kind of mental illness as well. And that, a lot of mental illness is cyclical as well. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, it's a really interesting kind of something that brings them together, but also kind of shows the very different kind of ways in which queens might have to step in. There's a really great book called Absentee Authority that talks about all the different reasons why someone else might need to step in for a ruler. And again, one of them is incapacitated monarch, a monarch who is ill mentally or physically requires someone to step in from them. them. But again, another one is, monarchs that are underage. And that very often happens in hereditary or dynastic monarchy, that the heir may not be of age, when the previous ruler dies. So I think, again, it's a really kind of key aspect of queenship. And when we look at queenly power, a lot of women exercise a huge amount of authority as regents and lieutenants for husbands and sons, sometimes even grandchildren. So again, or nephews, actually, nieces and nephews. So all sorts of reasons why royal women are often the right person to step in when there's that power vacuum.
The reason why I was asking you the period is because in Castile, Catherine of Lancaster is
Of
regent.
course.
So
Yeah.
we have so many women in power. Really, we talk about, Isabel being a pioneering ruling monarch, female monarch, but there's precedents in the 15th century with all this turmoil and civil wars and that, and women have to step in to rule. So people, the court gets adjusted. It's like, oh, okay, she didn't do a bad job. Maybe next time she can do it again. But another thing I was thinking when you were talking, which I think is very important, is, and let's bring up the tool Henry VIII, is choosing a wife when you are an elderly monarch with a very young kid, right? Why did he
Mm.
choose Catherine Parr for his last marriage? Probably because he knew she had what it took to become a regent if she had to, or he didn't choose, sorry, Anne Boleyn for his last marriage. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I'm really, no, but I'm glad that you brought in Henry VIII because, again, he's a great example of a king who does deputize to obviously both Catherine of Aragon and Catherine Parr
Yep.
to act as lieutenants,
Yes.
during his campaigns in France. So, again, you see that happening where this is another great example of that. I'm away on campaign. I need to deputize someone to rule. The most, the most sensible person to do that with is my wife, my ruling partner, if you like, the other half of my monarchy. And of course, Catherine of Aragon does a stonking great job, obviously winning the Battle of Flodden and all the rest of it, right? And Catherine
Yes.
Parr, again, very effective in the role. And,
Yes.
Susan James has argued that actually Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor both benefited from watching her exercise power in that way and so, oh, right, this is how a woman can rule. So, yeah, definitely. That's another great example of kind of regency and lieutenancy and the power that it gives royal women.
Exactly. And then Catherine just has to remember her mother, has to close her eyes and see her mother, leading troops in Granada. And she didn't fight the battles mostly because she was pregnant all the time, but also she didn't fight the battles because she was the person who was protecting the whole. The women in the army have a different, the leaders and the female leaders in the army have a different role, right? A queen is the one, for example, when Catherine is regent, she's pregnant. How is she going to go into battle? But she does give a speech to the troops. And, we're told that it fires. So it's very important. Once the soldiers have seen that, of course, they're going to accept a woman in certain circumstances. It's changing the game. That's what we're saying. And I think these two parallel lives that you brought are kind of women that are breaking the glass ceiling of queenship in a way, right? In the 15th century with Catherine of Lancaster, but also with Joan of Navarre and Isabeau of Bavaria, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So, again, yeah, I think you're absolutely right to kind of note that these women are, yeah, and I think again, this is where opportunity knocks, right? You get these opportunities to access more power and to exercise authority, and you want to take them, grab them with both hands, and do a good job. And Isabeau's track record as regent, again, much debated and discussed. And again, I'm definitely point towards Rachel Gibbons and Tracy Adams for their wonderful kind of dissection of her career. Some people have said she was useless and she wasn't trained for it and she was no good at it, but they really kind of argue that we have to see the chaos of the times and judge her in a different way. Joan's very effective as regent, incredibly effective, and we see her really mopping up some of the messes left by her late husband, really establishing her son's reign at a time when there was other rivals for the ducal crown, etc., and really kind of warding them off and ensuring that her son would reign. And she's very good at resolving disputes with the church and all the rest of it. So she's very effective in the role. So again, they show, again, when women are given that opportunity, they can jump in and they can really exercise power effectively.
What do we know about her education? Because that's one of the points that always comes to mind. Basically, as I'm obsessed with women's education, how
Yeah.
that empowers women to do great things, given the opportunity. Do we know about her education? Did she grow up in Navarre? Because sometimes they have these
She did.
names and they don't grow up in these places, right?
Yeah. No, she definitely did grow up in Navarre. Yeah, and it's funny. I was just thinking, this morning I was dipping back into Vives and thinking about the conversations we've had about queenly education. Absolutely. With Joan's education, I mean, she did grow up in Navarre, and then actually she kind of the first kind of institution, I guess, that she was kind of was looking after her was a Clarissan convent of Santa Clara de Estella. So again, that
Oh
was her
yeah.
kind of earliest. Yeah, and again, there were other kind of royal women of the House of Navarre there. So again, we can see it maybe as a bit of a school for infantas, in a way.
Hmm.
And then later on, she's actually under the wing of her aunt, the Countess of Foix. So Agnes, who's got a really juicy story of her own. Her husband repudiates her, and basically divorces her and sends her home in the middle of winter, like with almost nothing but her bedgown on.
Oh
He
my
just chucks
goodness.
her out, sends her home again. That's a whole nother story for another time. But Agnes comes back to the Navarrese court. And Joan's mother has died quite young, actually, after childbirth, as sadly so many women did. And
Hmm.
Agnes steps in and becomes that surrogate mother. She creates a household of the infantas, so with Joan and her sisters. And again, she is really vital in the raising of Joan. And Joan's also benefiting from, again, two of her aunts are dowager queens of France. They provide
Hmm.
really good models for queenship for
Hmm.
her. So I kind of view them as the molders in Joan's life. These women that kind of provided really key models of dowager queenship, which is
Hmm.
important because Joan has two widowhoods and she is a dowager duchess and then a dowager queen for a very long period from 1413 to 1437. And so that model of kind of how to be effective when you are the relic of a previous reign and stay relevant and stay engaged in politics and, kind of continue to kind of be a queen. I
Right.
think those two women were really, really key in kind of molding and shaping Joan as models.
It just seems like there's a lot of women, powerful women in Navarre
Mm.
throughout this period. So I was wondering if it's connected to education. And when you mentioned the creation of the household, that's always important because that gives structure to education and the raising of the royal kids, right? Navarre is a fascinating place that I don't think people know enough about. And let's sadly remind everyone that Fernando of Aragon conquered Navarre the same year of Flodden, the Battle of Flodden, and was added to Castile, right? It became part of the crown of Castile.
Absolutely. And so Navarre, I mean, the thing that kind of led me to working on Joan is that my PhD was on the reigning queens of Navarre. So
Mm-hmm.
Navarre has five regnant queens. Again, one of the largest groups of regnant queens in one kingdom in the Middle Ages. The other one
Mm-hmm.
is the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which is a very interesting test case
Mm-hmm.
of its own that I worked on in my master's. And so, the women of the House of Navarre are fascinating and really, really interesting. And actually, that's what led me to Joan, because I'd worked on these regnant queens who were all relatives of Joan, like Blanca, who was her niece,
Blanca,
and
yeah.
her grandmother, Juana Segunda, etc. And so for me, working on Joan was a really interesting one that allowed me to kind of fill in the blanks and work on a different generation, kind of between some
Mm-hmm.
of my reigning queens. But also, it started out, I mean, literally, it started out as my colleagues teasing me, saying, you've done all this work on Navarre and you keep on having to go to Pamplona. Why don't you do Joan of Navarre and you could just go down to Kew? She was here in England, and I'm like, oh, that I don't really do consort queens, etc. And I was like, actually, she's really interesting, and
And
it's
Q's around the corner, so I'm just gonna.
no, but again, it really allowed me to kind of join the dots, not just in the family,
Mm,
but also between Navarre and England. And that's
yeah.
been really interesting to kind of look at as well, that relationship between them, the role she plays there, again, as that pivot point between Navarra and Brittany and England throughout her whole life. That's really, really important. So I'm so glad that, I kind of happened into kind of getting to know Joan, because she's equally as fascinating as the kind of female sovereigns that I looked at previously in the country.
And is it the same case in the case of Isabeau of Bavaria? Does she come from a place where women are educated, empowered, or do you see that difference there? If there's a context of women empower, women do a better job, and if it's not, they kind of struggle through it, right? A little bit more.
Yeah, well, Isabeau's from Bavaria, the House of Wittelsbach. There's been a lot of discussion about her education or lack thereof, or what we know about it. I mean, obviously, one of the things that's a little bit harder with medieval queens is we don't always have the same kind of hard data on
Right.
their education as we might for kind of early modern queens. I mean,
Yeah.
again, thinking about Vives and all the things we know about like Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor's education, sometimes we have blanks that we have to kind of fill in. And Isabeau's preparation for queenship has again been something that's been debated and discussed.
Right.
So one of my colleagues, Zita Rohr, has really argued that Isabeau was just not educated and prepared for
Right.
becoming a French queen, that
Right.
that wasn't necessarily seen as being on the cards for her. So she was kind of thrown in the deep end, and that's part of the reason why she struggled. Whereas again, Tracy Adams and Rachel Gibbons have tried to give a more nuanced kind of feel of actually there are, powerful women and things in her family, and she was maybe more prepared than we might imagine. So again, we don't have as much kind of hard data to say, oh, we know she had these things. Although one thing that I guess one thing that we can see that kind of becomes a model for other queens is Isabeau of Bavaria is the patron of Christine de Pizan. And of course, Christine de Pizan becomes really vital in the education of successive generations of royal women. Obviously, her City of Ladies, the Treasure of the City of Ladies, the Treasure in particular, that whole section on the good princess and how the good princess should act and etc. Again, so in a way, Isabeau of Bavaria is connected to the education of many queens because
Yes.
those books that she's sponsoring and patronizing become this kind of foundational material for later European queens and queenship.
Well, I must confess, Christina Pisano is one of the people I was put in my, if you ever could choose historical character to have dinner with, because I am fascinating. I think she's a first feminist. And I can't thank enough people who study the medieval ages, because it's so difficult too. So, thank you for, unpicking all those things. For me, it's easy. I just go to the accounts of Isabel of Castile and everything's there, about Catherine's education or Juana's education. It's different when the mother is a ruling queen and the documents are all over the place. But in this case, is the fact that she does patronize Christina of Pizan. I mean, come on. Christine is the biggest, I would argue, the biggest female author in the Middle Ages, right?
Oh, in terms of female, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think Christine de Pizan, again, she's the first kind of female professional writer in a way,
Yeah,
at least in the
I love her.
European kind of context. So she is so vital. And again, because she's also so influential, she's so important to kind of understanding again the expectations and educations of European queens in the later Middle Ages and beyond. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this now. I don't remember her name, but I know in the reign of Catherine of Lancaster, there's a woman who writes the first autobiography. She is Catherine of Lancaster's advisor. What is her name? And she writes the first autobiography in Spanish ever. So
That's amazing.
obviously there's something going on in culture because Christina Bizan, and it's the women in power. The women in power are going to bring women, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and thinking globally, I mean, I know that it's like, kind of outside the scope of this particular podcast, but actually, if you look at about the same time, we have a Chinese empress writing the Nexian, which is like instructions for court ladies and queens, etc. So, we do have these kind of works coming out from women to teach other women, at similar kind of times. A little bit later than Christine de Pizan, such we have Anne of France's Lessons for My Daughter, right? Where she's talking
right.
about kind of, so we do have women writing to other women about kind of how to be a good queen or kind of, educating queens, etc. So there's some exciting kind of connections and links there.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like, don't listen to the men. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Ellie, is nothing is outside of this podcast. So you're
That's
gonna have
right.
to come back again. And I love women writers too. Maybe we should do parallel lives about these first female writers, professional writers like Christine. Christine actually was a professional writer. She lived off this, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this is so early on. This is still the Middle Ages and is incredible. I think the time you study, I mean, I know you study queenship as broad, but the 15th century is fascinating. Navarre, like you said, I think it's just wedged there between two great, powers too. So the women, it's just fascinating to see how the women become these agents of diplomacy. Even before they have power, they're just always working towards all these things. So I think it's just fascinating. So I encourage everyone to read Ellie's book. It was published in Routledge, right? What's the
Lives of Royal
series?
Women's
Yes,
Lives of Royal Women. Yeah.
right. Lives of Royal Women. And many books on women, royal women too, in that series too, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
And more
Christmas is
coming all the
coming up.
time. Hmm.
Yeah, Christmas is coming up. You also have a very good book on global queenship, right? Several, but you did the companion to global queenship
Yeah,
too?
the companion to global queenship, and kind of more a kind of smaller, more accessible book on queens and queenship, which again looks at it kind of across all time, place, more kind of theoretically, but weaving together the stories of women across from the ancient world to the present day.
That's those that need to be on your Christmas list, people, because Ellie is amazing, and just I love it because I'm about connections too. And I used to think I was crazy, but then I read Ellie's work and I'm like, no, no, this makes sense. There's connections between people across cultures and times, you know? So thank you so much. What's up? What's happening now at the University of Winchester? Where you guys up to? You want to talk about your podcast too? You have the Royal Series podcast?
Yeah, we've got the Royal Studies podcast, been going since 2022. So, again, we often talk about queens on there, but
I was
kings
there.
and yeah, absolutely. Kings and monarchy more generally. So, again, what we really try and do with that podcast is highlight the kind of latest and greatest in the field. So projects, publications, exhibitions, all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, so that's all there.
Amazing exhibitions.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's an episode I did. I was invited to the podcast to talk about the exhibition. So if you want to go and listen to that, and Ellie's also been a guest before. So there's Rebecca might put the previous show on the show notes, so you can listen to that. Rebecca, do you want to ask any few last questions about parallel lives, or are you?
No, I think you've been wrapping it up pretty nicely with a little tight bow.
I was told by
today.
Rebecca, Emma, don't, you're not the guest today.
Shh, don't tell everybody our secrets.
Oh, I'm going to tell everyone. That's what my mom used to say. Don't tell everyone our secrets. I'm like, don't tell me stuff if I can't tell it.
No, I would just like to thank Dr. Ellie Woodacre for joining us on Dr. Emma and Me today. This subject has been so enlightening. I love sharing women in history who we don't hear about enough. And these two women and what you told us about them today, I feel like I need to run off and start reading more about them because they lived fascinating lives. So thank you, Ellie.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And again, I love Isabeau and Joan, and again, hopefully spreading the love, getting more people interested in them. That's fantastic.
Yes.
I love it too. And you'll have to be back, Ellie. So we put you on the spot because you talked about Christina Pizan and now I can't think about anything else. So hopefully, I know you're busy, but we'd like to have you back in the future. Thank you so much for coming today. Anything else, Rebecca?
No, we'll
just remind us of?
I think we will just see everybody next Thursday for our next Parallel Lives episode. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Ellie. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Dr. Emma and Me. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show. It really helps more people find it. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you'll know as soon as a new episode drops. And if you'd like to support what we're doing, head over to Patreon and become a patron. You'll get early access, bonus content, and more. Thanks again for being here. See you next time.